Welcome to Talos Takes. I'm your host, Hazel Burton. Joining me today is published author and security threat researcher Martin Lee, who is EMEA's lead for Talos's strategic planning and communications team. How are you doing, Martin?
Hi, yeah, no, doing very well indeed.
Excellent. Now, not to age you, Martin, but you have several decades under your belt in this industry, which is perfect because we're going to head back in time today, aren't we? So it is it's the 35th anniversary of ransomware, and whilst I would say we're not going to be celebrating that, it's certainly something that we always want to keep an eye on in terms of how it's evolving, because this is the way the bad guys get paid. So let's talk about that first iteration of ransomware. It is December 1989. We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel is number one in the charts. Just knocked off Paula Abdul's It's the Way You Love Me. What else have we got going on? We've got President George H.W. Bush and Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev met at the Malta summit, and they indicated that the Cold War may be ending. The United States invaded Panama. We've got the Day Without Art, which is an artist demonstration against AIDS, and we will come back to that. All sorts of stuff going on. The Unity Party in East Germany, as it was, they all resigned so that the communist rule has ended with the fall of the
Yeah, the
Berlin
wall
Wall.
had just fallen.
Yeah,
Yeah, we got the Stone Roses.
yep.
Uh,
We've got
Cut the
National Lampoon's
Parts.
Christmas Vacation. and
Yeah, Happy Mondays, Stone
yeah,
Roses.
Back to the
Yeah,
Future Part 2, all of that. And there was also the first use of ransomware. So tell us what happened, Martin, December 1989, when ransomware first came onto the scene.
yeah. So we have the very first instance of ransomware. We have an individual, and it's not entirely clear what his motivation was. It's thought that he had a grudge against the medical community, written a Trojan software that purported to be software to help you judge a patient's risk for developing AIDS, HIV/AIDS, which was a new thing at the time.
Mhm.
And this software was mailed out, so physically mailed through the post on diskettes. And if you installed it, it would then, after 90 reboots of the computer, if I remember correctly, encrypt your file name, so not the data itself, just the names of the files, and display a ransom note asking for, was it $378, something in those lines, to be mailed to a PO box in Panama in order to get the key to unlock the files. So the very first ransomware attack.
Wow. And then some stuff happened in between, obviously, but the
Yeah,
next.
so first let's
Yeah,
just wind that back and
yeah,
reminisce a little bit about 1989 and also the state of IT.
yeah.
I think it's very easy to forget just how far we've come in technology since those days, and also why the world and the situation wasn't quite ripe for ransomware in 1989. Um,
Right.
I had my very first computer, my first PC in 1989 that I bought that summer. It didn't come with a hard drive because they were just, it was more than I could afford. So most people were using floppy disks. My first computer had the 5.25 inch sort of big square floppy drive, and the smaller 3.5, I think, which was, sort of
Yeah.
playing card size, but a little bit
Yeah.
bigger.
Couple of
So
megabytes of data on there, could you?
yeah. Was it 1.5 on a three and a
Yeah.
half inch floppy disk, which of course is nothing for these days. But without a hard disk drive, actually, the ransomware wouldn't have been effective. So there's only sort of the highest end of users that might be affected by this. Also, for the ransomware distributor's point of view, they've got to physically mail out the disk. So they've got to buy the disk, put it in the post, and send it out. This is not an efficient way for distributing malware. The internet as such had just been born. There certainly wasn't a World Wide Web. There weren't any web pages. There was email, and maybe you could exchange files with universities, but this was largely an academic network. So you couldn't distribute malware in the same way that you could today. So
Yeah.
for that reason, it wasn't a successful attack. We don't. It's not known if anyone actually paid the ransom,
Mhm.
but it set the stage. And as you
It's the
say,
notion, right? It's the notion that has been around, for years, decades, hundreds of years, that if you stop someone from doing what they want them to do, they may pay you, to unlock, and get back up and running again. It's that notion that they perhaps started and took advantage of.
yeah, and it really was an innovation. It really was an innovation. Nobody had really researched it, predicted it. This was the very first instance of it.
Yeah. Now, the first criminal use of ransomware didn't actually happen until about 15 years later, December 2004, because obviously all the bad stuff happens around Christmas time. So tell us how we got to this point, and tell me about that first criminal use of ransomware.
So, not a lot happened in the ransomware world since 1989 and the early 90s. We have academic researchers in the mid 90s and 1996 researching about the possibilities of crypto viruses, as they called it at the time. So, malware that would do cryptography in some way. But even then, it's many years later, and yeah, it's it was December 2006, wasn't it? Yeah,
2004? Oh,
2004. Yes, of course. Yeah,
yeah,
no, it was 2004 because it's the 20th anniversary that we get the first traces of files that have been encrypted by what turns out to be the first criminal ransomware GP coder. That
yeah,
was the first attempt by a criminal to actually really profit from ransomware. So that was distributed as a fake job invitation in Russian language to Russian speakers. If you downloaded it, it would then, yes, encrypt your files using a very basic form of cryptography, at least for nowadays, although it was really state of the art at the time. And then it asked for a ransom to be paid. I think it was by a bank transfer, if I remember correctly, in order to get the key. So here we have that first instance of what we expect from modern ransomware. So being distributed over the internet to a large number of users, and then using again technology in some way to collect that
yeah,
ransom. So we don't have the problem with the first one of that physical distribution of diskettes,
yeah,
and also we're using modern payment rather than money orders to be sent to a
yeah,
physical address. So it's that first trace that we have of actual criminal,
yeah.
a proper criminal ransomware.
So the criminal was paid via a bank transfer. So when did we start to see the emergence of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, that kind of thing, to allow ransomware operators to, I guess, stay hidden a little bit more and expand their
Yeah.
operation?
So the weak point or the difficulty for the bad guys is always collecting the money,
Yeah,
because you want to do it anonymously, because anyone in law enforcement is going to be following that money and seeing where it ends up, and because that's the
right.
person ultimately who's responsible. So the bad guys have always had that issue. How do they collect the ransom in a way that's hiding their identities, also in a way that's easy for their victims to do? Because if it's too difficult for the victim, they don't, they can't even pay even if they want to. so that the criminal can profit from this. So initially, yeah, bank transfers, but obviously that's not ideal because we're giving the money into the banking system, and those payments can be traced. So we have initially bad guys looking for gift cards, which still happens. They'll want you to buy gift cards and give them the code, which is a way of hiding identities. There was even ransomware that asked people to buy drugs at an online pharmacy that no doubt had a relationship with the bad guy. Our
Yeah.
first known ransomware victim in the UK was asked to pay the ransom in this way. But again, looking at it, it's still kind of inefficient from the bad guy's point of view. In the mid to late 2000s, we have these digital currencies springing up, Liberty Reserve, e-gold,
Yep.
which were ways of transferring money and transferring value internationally, but outside of the traditional regulated banking area. So they flourished for a while. They did have their legitimate uses, I think it must be said, but also they were very useful to the bad guys because it provided an easy way for victims to pay money, a relatively easy way for the bad guys to cash out, and to maintain their anonymity. Unfortunately for the bad guys, this was a single point of failure, which was amenable to regulatory authorities to intervene, and ultimately those payment facilities got taken down. But about that time, we also have the invention of cryptocurrency,
Yep.
and the cryptocurrencies offer what the bad guys are looking for, that anonymity of the exact identity of who's collecting the money at the end, and a way that victims can pay the ransom, so purchase something of value, transfer it to the bad guys. It's not entirely anonymous because you've still got to transfer that cryptocurrency into cash to pay your bills at the end of the day, and that's always a weak point. But nevertheless, it's proved to be incredibly useful to the bad guys as a way of collecting that ransom. So ransomware has grown at the same time or alongside and in parallel to the way that digital currencies and cryptocurrencies and that
Yep.
use of technology to transfer value has also on the internet.
Now, continuing down sort of the memory lane of ransomware, and not to age me now, but the first ransomware that I remember having to really get to grips with and understand, because I was in the industry by then, is SamSam. Now, this one was quite momentous because it took on a bit of a different direction, and it kind of showed a different way of doing things, not a great way for the defenders at least. Tell us about SamSam.
So the story of ransomware really has been one of innovation and coming up with the bad guys coming up with new ideas. Clearly, from our first criminal ransomware, clearly this was profitable and inspired a whole industry, and also having ransomware as a service so that the malicious software engineers could concentrate on writing malicious software and then farm out the distribution of the attacks to other bad guys who could then profit from this. In 2016, we have this SamSam ransomware that used a new model.
Mhm.
Prior to this, ransomware adopted a mass market style attack. It was trying to get on the end point, so the laptops and the PCs, of as many end users as possible. So just trying to infect large number of users and collect a ransom in the region of a few $100s, $300, $500 or so, because that's what people were willing to pay to get their data back on their endpoints. The gang behind SamSam chose a different direction. Instead of going mass market and hit as many victims as possible, they chose to target
Yep.
against businesses. and get inside the business, use sort of traditional hacking to expand across that network, identify key servers in that victim organization, and hit those with the ransom. So instead of hitting the endpoints, they're hitting key systems in businesses to bring that business to a
Yeah,
halt.
spreading
And
it.
just take out the key system,
Yeah,
stop the business, stop the operations,
yeah,
because then you can ask for a whole new world of ransom payments, because it's
yes,
not your laptop, you're halting an entire business. And clearly, this was a major innovation in the business model. And clearly, bad guys started making much, much more money by targeting businesses and working to get on those key systems than they ever could targeting end users on their endpoints.
yeah. Now it's a couple of, so you've written an article that our audience will be able to read alongside this about the evolution of ransomware since the December 1989 one, and within it you identified November 2019, so 30 years since the first one, as when modern day ransomware was born, and that was with the Maze group. So why have you called out that particular group as starting modern day ransomware?
Again, we have another innovation, another change. Prior to then, it was all about encrypting the data and taking away the accessibility of that data. Maze looked at it another way. Not only did they decrypt the data, they also stole it. So
Yes.
downloaded it and threatened to release it publicly. So not only, if you think about information security, looking at three different attributes: the confidentiality, the integrity, and availability. Previous malware was all about the availability, taking away the availability of the data. Maze not only took away the availability, but also threatened the confidentiality, saying if you don't pay, not only don't you get the data back, but we're going to publicly release it. So you have a very, very public data breach, which then, as a business, you then, if you're subject to GDPR or information security regulations, you have to report. There's going to be
Yeah.
fines, there's going to be paperwork. So the implication is, well, why don't you just pay the money and and it saves everyone the business. So it's this double extortion, that extra pressure, which is being piled
Yeah.
on the people responsible.
Yeah. Um, Now, in the article, you said something quite profound, which is, of course, something that we have come to expect from you, which is that we should not feel powerless in the face of ransomware. So, why is that? Why did you say that?
I The success of ransomware is also the a failure in IT. Let's face it. The Achilles heel of ransomware is backups. If
Hmm.
somebody encrypts your data and you have a working backup, you can just restore your files. We've known about backups and the importance of backups since the 1960s. And here we are in the mid 2020s, and still backing up and restoring data is an issue. So, certainly, we should not feel powerless. There are two big things that we can do. Number one, back up your data, back up the important stuff that you work on, so that if it gets encrypted, if it gets lost, if it gets damaged, you can restore it. This is the first thing that you can do. The second is have good endpoint protection. We know what ransomware looks like. There's only so many ways that you can encrypt data on a device, and with modern endpoint protection, we are looking for that. Hence, we see one of the first things that a bad guy will do now when they're hacking into a system is try and switch off the endpoint protection, because they know that if it's running, it'll detect them. So we really, really shouldn't feel powerless, because there's two big things that we can do really, really simple and easily: endpoint protection on every single device, back up the data that's important, rehearse the recovery so that we've got an instant response plan in preparation, so that if a bad day comes, we know what to do and rehearse it so that it's not an emergency. It's not something that everyone's running around panicking. We know exactly what to do to
Mhm.
get that data back again. And of course, in the wider context of cybersecurity in a business, things like multi-factor authentication as well. So really, really good way of stopping bad guys, and also having that network visibility. So that if someone gets inside your network, if someone's poking around trying to find those critical systems, you can see them. It's quite a noisy
Mhm.
activity, and if
Yeah,
you are collecting
deliberately
that
so.
data, yeah, well, not necessarily deliberately so. I mean, it has to be because you're
Well, they
going
need to
around.
kn yeah, they need to
Yeah,
know
they're
that they're in
rattling.
there. Mhm.
Yeah, rattling doorknobs, testing
Yeah,
doors, testing windows. Have they got this? Looking for things, looking to see what they can
yeah,
do. That command and control traffic is always going to be there. If they're stealing data, there's going to be massive outflows of data from your system. All of that is visible
yeah,
if you're looking for it. If you're not looking for it, you'll never see it. But if you do have the tools in place to look for it, if you are looking and you do have a plan of what to do when you see it, yeah, you can stop
yeah,
this. You don't need to be a victim.
absolutely. And my last question, so this conversation, we've kind of talked about how ransomware has evolved as the way that we have been working and, conducting business has evolved as well, particularly on that, like, kind of last bit where they're taking advantage of the increased regulations and, literally holding people to account. um,
Yeah.
do you have a notion of where ransomware may be heading next, or do you not see too many changes at the moment?
It's ransomware has proved to be remarkably innovative. So yeah, if we're going to see changes in criminal business models, I think it probably will be in ransomware. I think there's certainly areas where they might go, unfortunately, and how things might change. Those autonomously spreading worms. So we had a taste of that with WannaCry and NotPetya.
Yep.
I think there's possibly more scope for an autonomously spreading ransomware, unfortunately. Also, in the way that technology is changing, we have a lot of new devices and a lot more things that are connected now, and that increasingly our world relies on. We've yet to see ransomware really hitting those yet. So yeah, wherever there is value, whenever there is a system that we rely on, you can be fairly certain there's probably a criminal out there thinking, how can they get ransomware on it, or how can they
Yep.
profit illicitly from that?
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Martin. That is all for this episode of Talos Takes. You can keep up to date with all of Talos's research by visiting blog.talosintelligence.com or visiting us on our socials. We're on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Instagram, and maybe the other platform, but we might have come up there by now. I don't know. And this may well be our last episode for 2024. I'm not entirely sure because I haven't planned ahead very well, but I would like to take this opportunity to wish all of our listeners a wonderful holiday season. Get some rest, take a break, and we very much look forward to bringing you new episodes of Talos Takes in the new year. Take care. Thanks for listening.